There's a nonstop talk about money. We have these fundraising reports hitting the press right now, and I so often see candidates bandying about their big fundraising hauls as if that's a good thing. And someone will say, I raised $1 million in just a couple of months. And I'm like, do people really see that as a positive? I see that as something to be deeply suspicious of. The expectation that people have that someone can stop working for a year to campaign. We're not in a position, and pretty much nobody I know is in a position to be able to say, I'm going to stop working for a year and go without health care for myself and my wife and my 3 kids so that I can gamble on this maybe. We're putting a very bizarre filter on who is able to run for office. We're only now allowing people to run for office if they are independently wealthy or retired. Bizarrely, amongst that are people who are in unions representing working people, telling me literally they could not endorse me because I'm still working.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is Reverend Matt Schultz, pastor for First Presbyterian Church in downtown Anchorage. He was the Democratic candidate for Alaska's lone U.S. House seat up until he suspended his campaign on July 17th. With his departure, there are still 14 candidates in that U.S. House race, but the incumbent Republican Nick Begich and challenger independent Bill Hill are the only ones who have raised significant campaign funds. Hill has raised more than $1 million so far, and Begich more than $5 million. Schultz had raised less than $900,000 at the time of his withdrawal. This is Matt Schultz's third appearance on this podcast. I will drop links to those previous episodes in the show notes. If you want to learn more about his life story, which includes being the son of a former Catholic priest and a former Catholic nun, listen to the second episode. Today's conversation is exclusively about his congressional campaign. Reverend Matt Schultz, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you.
It's no secret, I'm just saying this for listeners, I endorsed you from the very beginning.
Thank you so much, by the way.
I spoke at your first fundraiser.
Yeah, you brought down the house.
Well, but you know what's so funny though? Then I went home and I tried to really quickly make a video and I added some terrible music and I posted it on all my social medias. There were literally people being like, this is the worst fundraising video ever. So I just want to apologize for what some social media users thought was the
You know what? The only reason I suspended my campaign was because of that video.
I knew it.
It's entirely your fault.
I knew it.
Yeah.
I knew it. You had an op-ed come out on Thursday, July 23rd, I believe.
I lost track of what day is what.
The ADN.
It's been a funny week.
And I want to read a paragraph from your op-ed. You said, Alaska Democrats should stop pandering and start persuading, proclaiming the truths that they have shied away from for too long, such as the Republican Party is dragging our nation toward enslavement to billionaires. The President of the United States is a rapist and a fraud, is mentally and cognitively unfit, and needs to be impeached. ICE is racist. Oil is burning us down and robbing us blind. The number one cause of death among children in the U.S. is guns. And honestly, that is why I endorsed you in the very beginning, is because it was refreshing to have someone who has been saying things like this for a very long time in a very public way without apologizing for saying it. And I guess, can you talk a little bit about what you see as maybe fear to say those sorts of truths?
Sure. First and foremost, thank you for having me here. Thank you for all of your unwavering support. I know that doesn't come without cost often for someone in your position. I'm very grateful. And I'll say to everyone listening, thank you for those of you who did support me. That means the world. Thank you so much. It's been an honor and a privilege and a joy to run. Saying all those things that we don't shy away from, from the very day that I declared my candidacy, I think a lot of people in the world of politics didn't quite know what to do with me because I'm not your typical candidate. I'm not a politician. And my career as a pastor is heavily weighted on preaching, which is heavily weighted on telling the truth regardless of the consequences. So, for example, when I say controversial things from the pulpit, it frequently means that people don't care for that and leave the church, which carries not only a social cost, but a financial cost. They're no longer contributing and we lose people there. But the first fidelity is to the truth. You have to be truthful in what you're saying. That paragraph you read there, those things that I believe the Democratic Party too frequently shies away from, many of those are simply facts. They're just a fact of the matter. Those that are wrapped in interpretation or opinion are certainly right in the heart of what it means to be a progressive or a liberal or someone on the left or a Democrat. However you want to sling those labels around, people tend to use those labels how they choose. But the things I'm saying there are not extremist positions. Most of them are in the majority opinion within the United States of America, many of them in the majority opinion within Alaska. And I think that the Alaska Democratic Party in particular, but the National Democratic Party absolutely, has so embraced the concept of trying to pander to this mythical middle voter that they're willing to set down any of these truths, any of these facts, just to hopefully bring someone over from the other side. And on one hand, that makes sense in the short term, right? Maybe that means we'll get someone in office tomorrow. But what they're missing is the fact that we are now presenting ourselves as a party that compromises on everything. We're showing younger generations that we don't have the willingness to stand for what is true or what is good or what is right. And we are, in every instance of that compromise, shifting the Overton window further and further to the right, so that now it is acceptable in public spaces for prominent Republicans to be saying women shouldn't vote. If we had been standing strong all along the way and saying MAGA is a cult, they would not have that prominence now. But we were too busy compromising and saying, let's try to get some of those voters instead of let's trying to correct some of those voters.
I think sometimes people temper their views because I think that's how they're going to get along with Republicans. But I think that actually watering yourself down in order to get along with everyone actually means that everyone distrusts you a little bit.
Absolutely, yes. Yep. You don't have to compromise your principles to get along with someone who disagrees with you. There are MAGA Republicans in my church, and they look me in the eye and say, you're wrong. And I say the same thing back to them, and then we have communion. You know, you don't have to compromise your principles to have a healthy relationship with somebody.
So I guess bouncing back, I assumed that your decision to run was a lengthy one, that you didn't decide over a weekend, let's run for Congress.
It was months. It was certainly months. Started back in, I believe, January on the first No Kings rally.
January 2025.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. January 2025, I think it was Inauguration Day or the day after, there was a No Kings rally in town. And in case people listening don't know me, I've been speaking in public for a long time at various rallies and things and writing in the paper and stuff. So a lot of people knew who I was in Anchorage. And I spoke at that rally, and then the rally marched down the street and back, and people kept coming up to me and saying, will you run for office? Will you run for office? My wife, Elizabeth, was there. And every time someone said that, I made some goofy joke. And she, at the end of that day, said, you need to quit joking about that and start thinking about it and take it seriously.
And for folks who don't know, your wife is also a minister.
She is. And based on the structure of our church, people might be familiar with the Catholic structure where it's bishops preside over many priests, right? In our structure, the executive presbyter oversees many different churches and pastors. Elizabeth is Reverend Elizabeth Schultz, and she is our executive presbyter. So in many ways, she's my boss. She's the best Reverend Schultz I know.
So she heard the people asking you, you made jokes about it.
Yeah.
And she said, maybe we should think about this.
Yeah. And so our process of decision-making is a theological process of spiritual discernment. And I don't want to get too deep into the weeds with you here, but really it is very heavily based in prayer and a sense of calling. Vocation, not meaning like your current job, but what is it that your soul is intended for here on earth? And would this activity be harmonious with that or contradictory somehow? So over many months, I reached out to trusted friends and acquaintances, some mentors, family members. My father-in-law served in the Maryland State Senate for many years. So we sought his guidance, and my mother-in-law, Joy. Every couple I know involved in politics, it's a marriage level decision, right? You're doing this together. So yeah, many, many, many months of prayerful discernment, conversations, etc.
So you mentioned your father-in-law who was in the Maryland State Senate?
Yeah.
So that's a state legislative position. Why go straight for U.S. Congress and not a state legislative position first?
Well, I've been doing a lot of work with advocacy on various issues and helping to write various policy things at that city level and, ghostwriting some speeches and opening prayers and the like for state level legislators. I felt that my current ability to reach people was already at that level. I probably had a similar name recognition to some people in the Alaska State House. And I was seeing part of this as being an opportunity to communicate a message to the state as a whole. At the same time, I see an existential threat to our country in the MAGA movement. And I think it's important that we flip the House of Representatives and that we have people in place that are willing to state those things that I mentioned on a national level. And the question of impeachment, I think we need a vote in there to impeach him.
You happen to live in a Republican State House Representatives district. So for folks who serve in the House with a very tight majority, the joke is that it's 20.5 in the majority, because I would say it's safe to say we don't have an alignment of most values. We found a couple of things that all 21 of us could agree on. Flipping a conservative to a progressive seat would make a big difference.
Oh, sure.
In the Alaska State Legislature. In the place where you are now, having dropped out, there is a piece of me that's like, well, we could have flipped a state house seat.
I mean, in retrospect, there's a lot of things we could have done. I could have run for assembly. I could have gotten a non-elected, but somehow politically influential job. There's lots of things that could have been in retrospect. I mentioned that process of discernment. That includes weighing those options and seeing not only what logically makes sense, but also what spiritually feels right. The way I communicate it to my son, who's not a churchy guy, is that it's like when you're floating a river, and sometimes you're drifting one way, sometimes you eddy backwards a little bit, and sometimes you find yourself in the current, and you go with that current. It's sort of a little bit of a Buddhist kind of vibe. And when you go with the current and you know it's the right thing to do. This was where that current took me.
Tell us about the experience of running for Congress. What were the good things?
It was joyful. Really, it was. There's a lot of overlaps with ministry, one of them being the opportunity to meet with people and hear from them what they care about the most. And over again, sometimes people expressing their deepest sorrows and pain and crying, other times expressing their biggest successes and gratitude, other times their most audacious hopes for the future. Every single one of those things, I'll use the phrase now, I would say every one of those is sacred. It's a beautiful thing that they share, and I get the privilege of hearing from them. Sometimes they were saying those things against me, right? Like, I've experienced these hardships and I think that your positions would make them worse. Okay, it's still a sacred thing they're sharing with me about their deep and meaningful experience. So getting to travel around the state, see some places I hadn't seen before, meet tons of new people, and talk about things that truly, truly matter. Very little time was spent on, boy, nice weather today. It right away, people stop me at Fred Meyer, and as soon as they give me that first look of, wait, I've seen you somewhere, they're like, oh, you're that guy. Oh my goodness, healthcare is a mess. I need to tell you about my sister, right? And suddenly they've opened a window into their soul that I want to treat with the utmost care. So that's been the heart of the campaign for me.
What were some places that you visited that you've never been before, and do you have any stories from those places?
Actually, when I'm thinking back on it now, maybe the only new place was Cordova. But, I've then traveled around to lots of places I had been previously as well. In terms of specific to the location, I think the more important thing to me was how common the stories were. And that's why I brought up healthcare. Every single place I went, they shared a story about struggling with healthcare. Affordability became the vocabulary word of the year. But in my experience, while that's true, that was important to everybody, it was healthcare that they really brought up with passion. And so that was the commonality throughout the whole time of people saying, my grandma shouldn't have had to have died that way. There was no dignity in it. Or, my neighbor shouldn't have had to die at all, but he was unable to afford the tests that I was able to afford to prevent this disease that he got because he wasn't wealthy enough. Those are the things that are really setting people's hearts on fire.
And I assume there were some negative aspects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a guy that I thought was going to take a swing at me. He didn't, yelling at me about abortion. That's not a topic that people are chill about on either side of the issue. And so, interestingly, or maybe predictably, the fact that I am an ordained minister who is pro-choice, that I think increases people's anger about it. They see me as betraying the whole faith and not just any other person, being wrong.
There are people who call you the Antichrist.
I get that on a regular basis. People call me Satan. People call me all sorts of stuff. Getting into politics, people, oh man, again, I won't throw anyone under the bus. I think this is true maybe in any quote unquote industry. People like to think they're so tough about it, and they think, oh, our job is so uniquely hard. And when I was asking around, should I get into this, or even early days of the campaign, people were like, are you sure you're ready for this? Coming from the church world, politics can be rough. First of all, so can the church. If you've never been a part of a church, it can be devastating. And number two, yeah, you're not so extra tough that you've survived politics. Every job is hard. And so I get called Satan, but I've been getting called Satan for over a decade now. So that was nothing new to me. Yeah, people see my pro-choice stance as a betrayal, my pro-LGBTQ equality stance as being a betrayal of all those things. And now, certainly since the advent of the Trump cult, people see just the fact that I'm a Democrat as some type of betrayal.
So right before I came here, I was listening to a podcast hosted by Governor Gavin Newsom in California. And the guest was saying that one of the problems that Democrats have is that Republican talking points are much simpler.
Oh, yeah.
Taxes are stealing from you. We want you to keep your own money, period. And then the Democratic talking point is we have to pay for infrastructure. We have to pay for the benefits that a society needs. And that requires us to, yes, what feels like stealing from you, taking a little bit of your money in order for the greater good. It's already just having that explanation. Mm-hmm. The Republican side wins for many people because they can understand it, simple in a few words. The same thing with abortion.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's a huge struggle that Democrats face, is that they have these more nuanced arguments that aren't good sound bites, particularly in 2026 when people have an attention span of 15 seconds.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, Democrats have forgotten how to sing. I got good advice when I was first ordained as a pastor, coming out of Princeton Seminary, which is a really academic environment. And I was preparing my first sermon for this new church, and the senior pastor at the place said, remember, you're writing a sermon, not a paper. And I thought that was excellent guidance, that the people in the pew don't want to hear the footnotes. They don't need me to say, well, this is really an Aristotelian construct that I'm citing here, and it was echoed by Augustine and all these other things. They don't care. They just want to be given a little bit of hope and a little bit of truth and move on with their day. And I think Democrats have lost the art of communication. Part of it, people like me just talk too much. Part of it is one of my early days interests was studying con artists in the 1800s in the US. And if you look at what the Republican Party is doing, it's right out of that playbook. They're just definitely very gifted con artists in terms of giving people what they want to believe and pretending like they have the route to the happiness through that thing.
I will use an example, very recent news, that the death toll in the Iran conflict was 18,
right?
But they revised it to 14 because the 4 recent deaths happened after a declared ceasefire in April, and therefore their deaths cannot be attributed to that previous conflict with Iran.
Yeah, it's lunacy. First of all, does that somehow make it acceptable? 14. All right, let's imagine for a minute it's 14. Still sucks. But yeah, their willingness to just go against the truth is part of the problem also, not on our side, but on their side. And of course, I don't know that we can really compare the MAGA movement with anything else in the US in the last 100 years, at least, because in my opinion, it is on the level of a cult. And so Donald Trump could come out tomorrow and say, that Joe Biden is an alien, and he'd have 30% of Americans believing him. I honestly believe that statement, he would have people backing him up.
And every once in a while, you think there might be a chink in the armor, because this issue of reducing the death toll from 18 to 14 was reported on by Fox News. And there was some skepticism about changing the death toll from 18 to 14, even on Fox News.
Yeah.
I think the more cynical people will be like, well, Fox News is always hedging its bets about where its audience's allegiance is going to lie. And if the MAGA base were to suddenly decide that Donald Trump is not their person anymore, Fox News has to be ready to go with their MAGA base.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the problem, isn't it? That it's media chasing an audience instead of media chasing the truth. It gets back to the compromise thing, too. Instead of chasing the truth, you're chasing the broader audience and saying, why don't we meet somewhere in the middle? But the middle is not truth. Sometimes it is, right? Sometimes truth is found in the middle. If we all try to estimate, how much does a large pizza cost at Moose's Tooth, we'd have outliers on both sides, but the whole bunch of us together average would probably land on the middle is the accurate answer. But with something such as, is it right to go to war for oil? The answer is not in the middle. The answer is no, it's not right. If the question is global warming real and being caused by our dependence on fossil fuels? The answer is yes. Not in the middle. The answer is yes. That's scientifically demonstrated. And so this constant chase of popular votes, of popularity, is different than the chase for the truth. And if we do a better job expressing and explaining and educating about the truth, that's going to, in the long term, become the popular opinion. That's going to become unity, because we're all going to go towards truth. And in the process, we come closer to each other. But if we have flat earthers on one side and round earthers on the other, and we say, let's compromise and all just agree that the earth is shaped like an egg, then we've all been fooled, and we're worse off for it.
And we have this recent emergence of being able to take online bets on not just like who's going to win the World Cup, but how many times Donald Trump will say a certain word in an upcoming speech. And then you have some social media personalities using the bets as some sort of evidence that something will happen. And I feel like it's kind of like an exponential fulfillment of what you were just talking about, where it's not about facts and truth, but it's like, well, if most people believe this, then we can safely say that's true.
Yeah, and that's so horribly destructive. That's because if you see someone stand up in a public forum and say, maybe we should just think for a moment if it's okay to be a Nazi, we need to say to that person, get the fuck out now. We can't say, well, let's give it a listen. Let's give it an ear. We have to be open-minded here. We have to be tolerant. No, you kick them out. They're gone permanently from that forum. And we've lost the ability to do that. We're so busy saying, well, we don't want to sacrifice what if this costs us votes in the middle? No, first of all, it doesn't matter. When you're standing for what is right and for what is true, that's the victory. And in the long run, that's going to play itself out. People don't look back on moderates in Germany in 1938 as some type of reasonable heroes of rational thought. They see them as complicit in atrocities.
I want to talk about your family. You mentioned your wife, Elizabeth, being the first person to say, hey, let's talk about running for office. Seriously. How has your family supported, been annoyed by, participated in this? You have 3 kids, I think.
Yeah, and they're all grown, and they're all living here in Anchorage, and they've just been beautiful and wonderful. I'm so grateful. I have 3 kids, 26, 22, and 18, thereabouts. I'm rounding off. My 26-year-old is not at all political. My 22-year-old, very involved. And then my 18-year-old is kind of a mixture. She's somewhere in between there. She's very well informed, very intelligent on these things, but isn't necessarily active. They were all super supportive. They were all not only saying it's okay if you do it, but saying we think you should. At the same time, the whole family recognizes that this is an insane world. It's a highly divisive atmosphere right now, divided atmosphere, I should say. And people literally have been murdered in politics in the last couple of years in the US. And I had a chuckle in my voice there for the absurdity of it. Not that I find any of it funny, just the absurdness that when we were growing up, we never thought that would be the country we have.
I push back a little bit on that. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. I mean,
Sure. Yeah, but when I was growing up in the 80s, we were fed this line, that's not who we are. Right. And so, yeah, you're right. To look at it now and say the people that taught me that remember where they were when Kennedy was shot. Right. So they should have done better. But as I mentioned, hate mail is not new to me. But the intensity of it rose, the how often I got hateful comments and things definitely increased. And so that danger is felt by the whole family, which is a sacrifice they made. I'm sorry for and grateful for.
Did they participate in your decision to drop out?
Yes, my wife, absolutely, very much so. We made that together after lots of conversation and thoughtfulness and prayer. With the kids, less so. Even though they're adults, we still want to protect them from a lot of things, and there's certain things you say, here's where I think I'm going. Happy to hear your input, but the ultimate decision is mine. I think it's important with your own kids to take the burden of the decision off of them.
And I guess explain why you dropped out and why you dropped out at the point you did, which was a week.
I think it was 4 weeks before the primary.
Right, yeah. Which would be how long ago from today? Everything's a blur.
Yeah, you're telling me, man.
Did you drop out 8 days ago?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I don't remember. I dropped out for a number of factors. The biggest one being the confluence of too much money amongst my opponents and not enough support from the Democratic Party. So money. There's a nonstop talk about money. Money is how success is measured by people within the institutions at play. I think that's a tragedy. I think that is a symptom of Citizens United, not a benefit of how our system works. It's terrible. So, we have these fundraising reports hitting the press right now, and I so often see candidates bandying about their big fundraising hauls as if that's a good thing. And someone will say, I raised $1 million in just a couple of months. And I'm like, do people really see that as a positive? I see that as something to be deeply suspicious of. If you raise that much money in that amount of time, my first question is from whom and what did you sell to get it?
Hey, I'm going to ask a pointed question. Does it concern you that we have a Democratic gubernatorial candidate having large six-figure donations from Anthropic?
Yes. And in my opinion, that makes it really difficult for me to rank him, let alone vote for him at all. I think to me, that smells like a bribe. And it's a bribe made ahead of time. It's a bribe before you're in office, but it's like a down payment on a car. I'm going to put money into this in the hopes that it pays off in the long run. If you're taking money from somebody, that necessarily has some type of impact. There's a reason why in my church, I don't know who gives what. I know that if Joe Smith sits in the pew every single Sunday, there's a good likelihood that he contributes, but I don't know that for a fact. And if I do happen to be told that he gives by someone who knows, I don't know how much.
Is that your personal value to not know the amount that folks tithe? Or is that sort of like best practice for all ministers? Do most ministers abstain from looking at who?
Both and. It's not a set policy. It's not something you have to do. A lot of pastors say it's foolish. You got to know who butters your bread, and you want to make sure you keep those relationships healthy. I go the other way. I think my job here is to care for everybody. And if I'm going to be predisposed to care for the wealthy more, even if it's a subconscious predisposition, then I'm failing as a pastor. Now, Mr. Rasmussen was a member of my congregation, and there's no secret there that I'll bet you he's a huge factor in our church budget, right? And there are certain people in the church you kind of get a sense over time for certain things. But that doesn't mean that I should know each and every person's input. So a lot of pastors do it this way. A lot of pastors don't. I've been at this gig for 30 years now, and I think it's the best way to go. And impartiality matters. And if I, for example, as a candidate, if I were to have taken $1 million in from an AI company, I think it's foolish to presume that that would not impact the policies you propose and vote for.
I agree. I guess luckily, because I've remained pretty true to my 2022 campaign, there are certain organizations and industry people who have never participated in my campaign.
Sure.
But I did have a recent donor from the oil industry that was unexpected. I have never not accepted a check. Granted, we're not talking six figures. We're talking like $100 donation.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm finding some nuance here because I'm thinking about myself.
There should be.
I talked to that person at my fundraiser, and what that person said was, hey, I'm here in my own personal capacity because I care about what you're working on and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah.
I'm not here on behalf of industry.
Nice.
But, I mean, I do know who he works for. And, we learned this in the medical field with pharmaceutical companies giving gifts and providing lunches. Right. And, little things that where the doctor may say, it does not influence me that this particular drug company has provided us lunch every Tuesday for the past month. When it comes down to writing a prescription, they'll be like, she's a really nice drug rep. We're going to use her medicine on this patient. And it
shifts that gray area a little bit over in their favor.
Yeah.
If you could go one way or the other with this decision, well, I might as well go that way.
And so, and I think it's something that's come up a lot. I don't want to name a particular oil company. There's one oil company where people always say, there's a lot of really nice, good people who work there.
Yeah.
And I don't want to paint with a broad brush that everyone who works for an oil company supports the Republican Party and doesn't, care about increasing funding for public education and doesn't care about a return to a defined benefit retirement system and there are people who work for oil companies who have those same values.
Well, an old trope in the church world is the task of preaching is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And there are wonderful, kind people in my church every single Sunday, but part of my job is to afflict the comfortable and to say to them, here's where we need to move forward and do better. I 100% agree that there are good, kind, decent, loving people working in the oil industry. And at the same time, oil is burning down our planet. If that makes the comfortable feel a little bit uncomfortable, that's appropriate. They are working in an industry that is causing harm. People say to me all the time, the church has a history of atrocities, and there are churches today causing atrocities. That makes me uncomfortable. It's also true. We don't hold back on facing truths just because it makes us feel bad. And the Democratic Party, again, is so beholden financially to these same donors and is so afraid to take a strong stand on certain issues that we've just weakened ourselves to become a party of pandering.
Who was sitting in the seat 2 weeks ago was Ethan Berkowitz, and he is working on data centers, wanting to place data centers on the North Slope, to have the data centers using the natural gas in place, as this being a particular huge profit engine for the state. And I said that part of what I find shocking is that we have this natural gas shortage in South Central, but this looming cliff where we're not going to be able to get enough out of Cook Inlet. And so, there's this Hail Mary, we're going to build this 800-mile gas line. And while we're building that 800-mile gas line, we realize that the only way to justify that is to have a lot more demand than we have. We're going to export tons of it. We're going to have tons of data centers, maybe on JBear. We're going to create enormous amounts of demand. And I'm like, man, in a state where villages are literally falling into the water because of climate change, we're going to increase demand for fossil fuels? That's the way forward? And his response, which is one that I've heard many times, is it's going to happen, Andrew. If it doesn't happen in Alaska, it's going to happen in the lower 48. They'll find a way. It's going to move forward. It's inevitable. We can do it right. We can have better environmental regulations. We can avoid mistakes that are being made in other countries. We can do things better here. And this is going to happen with or without you. Shouldn't Alaska be getting its fair share of this future industry?
I don't know the inside info on these particular deals here. I've been really focused on some other things the last couple of months. And so all I can say that on the surface level, that smells funny. That smells like a lot of money is going to be made by a few people and cause a lot of damage and a lot of harm, leaving us in pretty much the same situation. For example, villages falling into the sea, people unable to access or afford groceries or heating fuel. I don't see any of that changing the situation for the common person, but it might pad a few investors' portfolios. And personally, I'm sick and tired of that. And if we're going to be doing anything, I want to see it as part of a roadmap toward the future that we should be aiming for. We shouldn't be just saying, well, how do we get through these next 6 months or these next 5 years? We should be saying, if we're building some type of industry, some type of energy strategy, how is this going to get us to the point of 100% renewable? Look where Kodiak and Juneau are right now in terms of their energy usage. That should be the goal of the whole state, and any steps we take should be with that end game in mind. But the only end game that I've
For listeners to understand, because of their hydroelectric dams, and Kodiak also supplemented by wind power, that's 100% renewable.
Right. And Kodiak has the wise backup option. They have a diesel backup just in case something happens. All right, great. That makes sense. Plan B. But if that's not the goal, then I'm not interested. If you're saying we're just going to get this LNG put in because it's going to make a few people $1 billion, and I literally had someone trying to describe that deal to me, someone very involved in putting it together. And they said, and the typical consumer will ask, well, what's that going to do? How much is it going to make in comparison to my bills? And my answer to them is, don't worry about it. It's going to bring your bills down. Don't worry about those things.
Right.
And as soon as, people in charge of the deal start telling consumers, don't worry about it, trust me, I'm like, hell no, I'm out. When a millionaire says, trust me, no, sorry. The more dollars you have, the less I trust you.
I want to go back to your op-ed. I'm going to read from your second paragraph in the op-ed, which people can find in the show notes. You say, sadly, I was not joined in this effort by many institutions within the Democratic Party. My priority was and still is to serve a greater good in this moment in history when we are facing an existential threat to our democracy from the creeping fascism enabled by the Republican Party. I really want to focus on that feeling like you were unsupported by many institutions within the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
I mean, Mary Patola, who ran for your office previously, I remember one of her speeches in 2024, which was first and foremost, Democrats need to not fight each other. If we're spending all of our energy attacking each other, that's wasted energy. So I'm trying to kind of thread that needle.
Yeah.
How can we talk about you feeling lack of supported at the same time with acknowledging that war within weakens us?
It's a great question. And I would say that it's not war within to speak difficult things to one another. A lot of ministry training is in the psychological understanding of family systems. And a family system is not healthy if truth is suppressed. Unity without justice is oppression. That's not the kind of unity we need. And it's not war within to say there were things done incorrectly here. That's not war within. That is a family system having a healthy conversation about how we might improve.
Are you able to talk a little bit about that? For the good of the order, what are some things that we could improve in the Democratic Party?
I'm not going to say too much, certainly not naming names, because at this stage of the game, I haven't even had the chance to say a lot of things to people who were involved face to face. And that's the way to do it. I certainly won't say anything here on the podcast I haven't expressed directly just to the proper people first. But it did become clear that for example, the the National Democratic Party wasn't going to show support in my candidacy, largely because there was not enough money involved in it. And so that's deeply disappointing that instead of saying we're going to support policies that matter, instead saying we're going to support something that's already doing all right. So that's troubling. The nature of endorsements has been interesting to me too. How many people have said to me they don't endorse who they think should win, they endorse who they think is gonna win. And it's a function similar to those big donations we mentioned before, that they're saying, well, yeah, we think you're the better candidate. And I'm quoting here, someone, I won't give the name. We think you're the better candidate and that you would better represent our values, but you don't have enough money, and we want to make sure that we have put our name behind the person that does eventually win, and it's so that we can have a better relationship with them. Now that raises two important questions. Number one, what does an endorsement even mean? Then it's placing a bet, like you mentioned before. They're not really saying what they think matters. They're saying they're placing their bet on a horse. Number two, though, it also asks the question, who are these people getting into office that are going to say, I'm not going to represent the values I ran on because you endorsed the other guy? If someone endorsed the other person and I got into office, I would still do my best to serve them. And it's ludicrous to think that someone in office would do otherwise. And apparently that happens, I'm guessing, but I think it's nonsensical. So yeah, the nature of endorsements has been strange, a strange world to me.
When I read the paragraph, I was at the Alaska Democratic Convention in Cordova. Two things. Number one, the day before the convention starts in earnest, there's these committee meetings. Yeah. I was in the one about the changing the bylaws to, right now, I think it's 75% was what you needed to get the endorsement of the Alaska Democratic Party, which is just a ridiculously high threshold. It's just an impossibly high number. And we worked really hard to amend it. We wanted to bring that number down to 2/3 would be more reasonable.
Sure.
I mean, it's still a very high threshold, but we weren't able to do it. And I remember there was just tons of vote counting happening and saying, like, could we get to the 75% number to endorse you? So I think that is a structural problem within the Alaska Democratic Party. I think that we need to change those bylaws. I do think that 75% is too high.
Yeah. I think so too. And here's one I can say, because it's not about an individual person or anything, but the lack of knowledge of how the Democratic Party system works in Alaska is overwhelming amongst Democrats. People who are in high-level positions, all the way up to the top, being completely confused by how it works and what the process actually is for any of these things. Absolute confusion and people being mystified. Oh, I don't know how this works, but it's like, that's your job. You need to know how it works. That is across the board. Also, the fact that we wait so long to make a decision as a party. I know that there's a filing deadline that the state chooses, and that there is a primary date that I assume is done by a nonpartisan state level decision, right? But that doesn't mean that the Alaska Democratic Party couldn't say, we are going to make our endorsement on January 30th of the year, and therefore we have time to unite as a party ahead of time. And if someone else signs up later on, they have that legal right, but we're going to put our eggs in a basket starting January 30th. The fact that the party is waiting so long and hemming and hawing and kind of shuffling their feet and saying, well, I don't know, there's a lot of time or a lot of this and that, to me, is setting ourselves up for a strategic disadvantage.
I can't not see that in the context of Graham Plattner and Maine and some of the issues with putting all the eggs in the Graham Plattner basket early and then doing everything possible to justify that decision. I think that kept him in too long. They could have replaced him earlier.
You can also have a reversal process in place, have that 2/3 thing that you're saying, and also do better opposition research.
Well, I'm not quibbling with an April endorsement. I'm quibbling with we had too high of a threshold in order to make the endorsement.
Yeah.
And speaking of endorsements, I think I can speak openly about the Alaska Center not endorsing you based on the fact that you kept your full-time job as a pastor in Anchorage.
That was one of the things that they said, yeah.
It wasn't because they thought, based on the merits of the candidates, that you were going to lose. It was based on the fact that you were not taking a leave of absence and making running for office your full-time job?
Yeah, that has been a surprising factor in this. The strategy that was well known to people in this world was that after the primary, I would be taking that leave of absence and focusing full-time between then. But the expectation that people have that someone can stop working for a year to campaign, particularly in my family, when my family's healthcare, it comes with that employment and the income that we need. We're well paid as far as pastors go, but in terms of living in this world, we're pretty darn average. And so to suddenly,
what's the average pastor salary?
I don't want to say my salary around
No,
here.
you don't have to say
I don't know what the average is. Yeah,
like a ballpark figure of how much a pastor makes, because I don't know.
Nationwide, I'm not sure either.
Okay,
but it's normal enough to have a home in the suburbs and do okay and not be struggling month to month. But certainly our retirement at this point is buy a lottery ticket once in a while. That's our retirement plan. There's it's okay. But we're not in a position, and pretty much nobody I know is in a position to be able to say, I'm going to stop working for a year and go without health care for myself and my wife and my 3 kids so that I can gamble on this maybe. Also bearing in mind that a pastor of a church is not the kind of job you can just step away from and step back into. Some jobs are like that, but being a pastor is very deeply related in relationships and long-term strategies and being present in people's lives and the important things going on. And so you don't just step away and plug in a brand new person, whoever, and then come back later on if it doesn't work out. To take a leave of absence for the amount of time that they're talking about is not a leave of absence. It would have been fully resigning entirely. We're putting a very bizarre filter on who is able to run for office, if that's what we're saying. And we're only now allowing people to run for office if they are independently wealthy or retired or have some other strange situation. Maybe they just don't have anyone depending on them, so they can just live on their parents' couch. I'm familiar with someone who were 48. That's what they did. A person, I think, like in their 40s, but happened to be in a stage in their life where they just go live with their mom for a while and run for office full time. All right, but is that a filter we want to put on the process? Do we only want people who are wealthy to be able to run for office in the first place? I don't think that's a good idea. And bizarrely, amongst that are people who are in unions representing working people, telling me literally they could not endorse me because I'm still working. What a strange contradiction of internal ethics that is.
I think this might be an Alaska-specific issue. Maybe if you were running in Connecticut or, a smaller state where you could conceivably drive to the farthest corner of that state. I did hear from somebody, I will say this, I heard from somebody that they were traveling to a remote village and that you had asked if they could do a little event maybe and speak. And she said that it was disappointing for her because she was like, well, I'm not a politician and I don't know how to speak. And he's so good at it. They need to hear him. Mm-hmm.
I don't know who that's referring to because I don't think I asked anyone to.
I'll cut her name out
for me. I asked if she could help set things up so that I could come speak.
Okay, but it wasn't for her to speak. That was correct. That was a misunderstanding then on her part because she thought that you wanted her to hold a little event on your behalf.
No, that was not my intent. And first of all, she's awesome. I think she's great. That was a misunderstanding. I was not asking her to speak on my behalf, but I wanted to be there in person. And I can tell you, that was not the thing. That wasn't the shortcoming of the campaign. The shortcoming of the campaign were other things, some of which I can't speak about yet publicly, but the things I mentioned in there, the financial picture, meddling of the Republicans, and lack of support from the institutions that supposedly are, that we should be unifying together on principle. That's where the hardship was, not in my hours given. I don't like to speak well of myself, which is a weird thing to go into politics because you're supposed to do that a lot. But I will say something I'm proud of was how much I worked. I've been working 2 full-time jobs since September of 2025. There's, of course, things I got wrong or didn't get accomplished, but that was not the linchpin. The linchpin wasn't the effort. It's those other things I wrote of that were the linchpins.
In Lisa Murkowski's memoir, Far From Home, she talks about when Joe Miller won the nomination for U.S. Senate in the Republican primary in 2010 and being shunned by national Republicans because who had always supported her, but now they were like, well, this is the process. And, you lost the primary. Mm-hmm. And when she decided to do the write-in campaign, basically being a pariah in the U.S. Senate because Republicans felt that she was betraying the process, the democratic process, by refusing to drop out. Mm-hmm. I guess I think about that when I think about feeling betrayed by National Democratic Party, who doesn't necessarily know the nuts and bolts of Alaska politics and having limited resources in terms of where they're going to put their money. Mm-hmm. And I'm basically trying to offer some defense to them that if they thought you were too much of a long shot, that they weren't going to invest.
Could be. I mean, I don't want to cast them as mustache twirling villains by any means, but when you turn to an institution to which you have been contributing and an institution which you have been supporting and promoting and speaking up, and then that is not met with a similar vibe, it feels like there's something off in that relationship.
And one last point I'll make back to that Cordova, Alaska Democratic Party convention. We weren't able to get to the 75% threshold. We didn't take the vote because I think the fear was that it would look worse to try to endorse you and fail. Yeah. But you were given the opportunity to speak and no other congressional candidate was.
Because there was no other Democratic congressional candidate. Every single Democratic congressional candidate spoke.
What do you see your role in this election going forward?
Going forward it's recent. I don't know for sure yet. I'm finding that current in the river. I do know that, along with the work that I did, one thing I'm proud of is I only told one lie the whole campaign. You want the scoop? I told my church already what it was. I was being interviewed early days by the Fairbanks newspaper.
Daily Newsminer.
Newsminer, thank you. And it was a fine interview and all. And then at the end, the reporter said, "What football team do you follow?" And I lied, and I said the Seahawks. The truth is, I don't give a shit about football. But I decided in the moment that won't play well. So I told one lie the whole time. So all that to say, what's next for me in this is I feel proud that I've maintained my integrity throughout, except for the one lie about a football team. Everything I've said has been honest. Even some things that I then learned better later and changed a little bit, nuance here or there based on being educated better. I've stayed true to my principles and my beliefs the whole way. So whatever comes next is going to be harmonious with that and part of the same momentum. So I'm going to continue lifting up the values and the virtues that are in this article and that I campaigned on all along, and probably supporting candidates that I think are really good. My church wants me to be involved in public life, and so that's a part of my job at church. I have some things to catch up on in church that I've, slowly been delaying over the last 2 months I can catch up on, but that's part of the broader calling of the vocation of a pastor is to, you're not limited to the four walls of the church sanctuary. You're supposed to take that message out into the world and speak words of love into a world that is desperate for any type of meaning or compassion.
What I noticed that's missing from the op-ed is an endorsement of Bill Hill. I mean, have you endorsed Bill Hill?
I've told people that supported me that they should vote for him.
I have to say, Bill Hill's been on the podcast. I also have to say that Congressman Nick Begich has been invited on the podcast.
Yeah.
So this is my legislative office podcast, so I try to include everybody.
That's fair. A lot of people invite Nick Begich to do a lot of things and don't get responses, let alone a refusal.
I have met with him in his office in D.C. We talked a lot about crypto. I think crypto is a Ponzi scheme. Obviously, he is the crypto legislator.
Yeah.
And I think when we look at the Trump family and the amount of wealth that they've made during this term in the White House, billions are from crypto. I will say that Bill Hill, he came on my podcast and there were things that he asked me not to include in the podcast because when he was superintendent of the Lake and Penn School District, there was a teacher who was killed by wolves. And
oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
It was a big deal, but I get emotional thinking about him asking that we not include any of that because he cares so much about the family. I think he is a good person. I'm just saying that for the record, for listeners, that I like Bill Hill. I can tell that there's some reticence to talk about Bill Hill, but
there's some things I'm comfortable saying. I agree with you. I think he's a good man. I met with him several times. He strikes me as kind-hearted, and I think on policies, he and I tended to be pretty similar. That's fine. My issues with him are that he refuses to say who he will caucus with.
Well, I want to kind of try to end on a positive note.
Well, I got one for you.
Okay.
I often preach right to the young people in my church as directly as I can, and it was a good opportunity the day that I spoke to church right after withdrawing from the campaign. We kept a real good wall up between church and state. We didn't talk about it much, but a couple of weeks ago, one of the little girls in the church, maybe 4 years old, she just blurted out right in the after church in the lobby area. She was like, "I want you to lose your race." And I said, "What? Why?" And she said, "Because I want you to stay our pastor. And if you get elected, you're going to quit, right?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." And she said, I hope you lose. I really hope you lose." So it was funny then the next Sunday to say, "Guess what, kid? You got your wish." And to talk to the kids about what it means to lose. And sometimes we try something that is really difficult and we lose, but that doesn't mean it was a mistake. It just means that not everybody wins everything they try, and we can still be proud of having tried it. And hopefully in that process, we made ourselves a little better. We grew a little bit as a person. And if we were doing the right thing along the way, especially a job like this, we communicated some things out into the world that helped make the whole process better for whoever might come next. I mentioned the Overton window before and the way Democrats are so quick to compromise and to step away from the word Democrat as if it's a swear word, right? Hopefully standing for what I stood for and speaking not only the things I spoke, but the way I spoke about them shifted that Overton window a bit more to the left so that whoever runs as a Democrat the next time around will have an easier job of it. So what I said to the kids was, it's okay to try and fail. That is way, way better than not trying in the first place.
Matt Schultz, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
It is my pleasure.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@aklug.gov or call 907-269-0123.